Amen. Well, good morning again. Great to be here. Hey, it is good to be back, man. I knew I was back when I walked out this morning and my glasses fogged over, so I was like, praise the Lord, you know. But actually, it was so fun. It was fun to walk back in this place on a Sunday morning. It's been awesome. If you know our annual rhythm as a family, we gather up our kids and we go up to North Carolina for a couple of weeks every summer. And actually, at this point, we're at the stage of life where we just tell our kids, we're going to be here from here to here. You can show up whenever you want. And so then they do. It's awesome. I actually drove up just with the dog this summer. And here's what I've discovered about the dog. She's the easiest, best traveler in the entire family, including me. Like, that dog loves to travel. It's amazing. I have to stop like every 30 seconds. She doesn't have to stop at all. It's fantastic. So anyway, but we had a great trip. We had a great time. And one of the things we did is we did what some of you guys do when you're out of town, and what some of you guys who are out of town are doing now. We just tuned in online, and it was wonderful to be able to do that. It is not the same, but it is the next best thing. And it's a great way to kind of stay in touch with what's going on in the church, what's being taught, what's coming up, what are the action points and opportunities and invitations to live out, as Sam said, your faith, really, as a follower of Christ, as a royal priest. And we did that. And we did that with our immediate family. We did that with our extended family. And I was, again, and probably I say this every year, but I don't care. It's worth saying because I think it's really a unique blessing. We are so blessed as a church with all of the leaders that we have, but I kind of want to single out some of the communicators that we have. We have like this wide range of people who get up and who give messages from the Word of God, and they just absolutely crush it. And I'm just like blown away by that. Dave Richardson killed it. Mason killed it. Sam killed it. Will, when he's here, except he was with us, kills it. Like, awesome and amazing. And if you're around Rio and you just kind of grown accustomed to that and you think that's normal, that's not normal. It is anything but normal. It's an abundance of riches in that regard. And so it was just fun. It was fun to sit there and to watch these guys take these hard sayings of Jesus that we're studying together as a church this summer and not only help us to understand them, but to understand what to do with them. Don't miss that last piece. The Christian faith, guys, just hear it as a call to action. It's just what Sam says. It's inviting us into action. If you think about it for 5 seconds, you'll figure that out. God did not create you to do nothing. Can we agree? All right, but let's go further. God did not redeem you to do nothing. He did not send his son, God made man, into the world to clear the deck for you, to pay your debt for you, to absolve you of all of your sin and shame and guilt, to purchase you at the expense of his life for you to do nothing. He did not, if we go further, fill you with his Holy Spirit and give you gifts of the Spirit for you to do nothing. He does not form you and shape you by his word and place you into a community of people known as a church, the greatest analogy of which is that of a human body with all of the different parts, and all of the different parts do what? Things. To do nothing. He's like, no. It's an active faith. Going back to the way he created you to desire purpose. He created you to desire meaning. He created you to desire to live a life that is significant, that actually, like at the end of it all, when you get all the way to the end, you can look back on it and say, by God's grace, my life mattered. We all want it, and we seek to find it in other ways because we don't know where else to look, and I'm telling you, look at Christ because he's inviting you into meaning. He's inviting you into purpose. He's inviting you into mission. Go on the mission. So today we're going to look at several hard sayings because they're all kind of packaged in one package where we're going to be in the scriptures today. And I want to use them to answer a question. And the question is, what is a Christian, okay? I'm not going to fully and completely and wholly answer this question. The Bible has a lot to say about all of these things, but we're going to do some blocking and tackling today. And I want you to be thinking in terms of what should I believe, what does a Christian believe, and therefore organically out of that faith, inevitably, irresistibly, what is it now my greatest joy to do? Because faith calls us to action. It shows up in the way that we live. So the hard saying that we're going to look at today takes place in a story, and the story takes place in a city, and the city actually matters to the story. And I'm going to show you a map of where the city is located. So you can see it here. If you look at this, this is a map of northern Israel, okay? And you can see where the Sea of Galilee is. Incidentally, if you go to Israel with us in February, still open, we're going to go to a bunch of these places. But if you look up, you can see where we're going. Caesarea Philippi is the name of the city, and that's where this story takes place. What a weird place for Jesus to take his disciples. Why do I say that? Because when you read through Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, and you look at the accounts of the life of Christ, and you consider where his ministry almost entirely takes place, about 80% of his ministry takes place right there on the northwestern tip of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum, that whole area in there. Capernaum is his home base, and almost all of the rest of it takes place in Jerusalem, down in the south, which is off the map, and in Samaria, which is in between. The Lord is 62 miles north. In addition to that, it's a little bit odd because Jesus, who is the Jewish Messiah, he has come for the salvation of the world, so don't feel excluded if you're not Jewish by any means. He's come for you, and the Bible has said that. The gospel is going to be to the nations. The seed of Abraham is going to be a blessing to everybody. It's an all skate. Everyone's invited. But when he comes initially there as the Jewish Messiah, and he comes to the Jewish people. Caesarea Philippi, it's not a Jewish city. It's a Roman city. It's a Gentile city. So he gets his guys. He's like, guys, little camping trip. We're going to walk. That puts new definition to this, right? We're going to walk 62 miles. What is that, like 3 days? At 20 miles a day? It's a lot in a day. I walked 500 miles once. Not kidding. Long story. Says a lot about me. 20 in a day is more than I did on any of those days. It was close a couple days, but it's painful, man. We're going to walk for 3 days, 20-ish a day, and we're going to go to Caesarea Philippi. The whole way they've got to be going, why are we coming here? Caesarea Philippi, it's a Roman city. There are no Jews. It's a city that's full of false gods, which, by the way, if you're looking to build a bridge between what we're talking about today and where we're living, that's it. I love our city. I really do. I'm a South Florida guy. Like, people move to South Florida and then they move away. Have you noticed that? Like, if you didn't grow up here, if you don't have family here, if you don't have roots here, if you don't have people and things that are meaningful and valuable to you that hold you here, you go where your glasses don't fog over when you walk out in the summer oftentimes, and you find kinder, gentler cultures to live in typically. It's true. I almost don't hire anyone unless those boxes get checked because I've seen it happen. I love this place. It's beautiful. I can't stand this place. What is this like? I love this place. I'm called to this place, and I hope that you are too. If you stick around and you follow Jesus, you'll fall in love with it. It is a special place that needs the light of Christ desperately. And that's your mission because you have a faith and it calls you to, well, do things. Okay, we're getting to that. But Caesarea Philippi was a place, it was a city that was full of gods. Our city is full of gods. Now, there's some differences between their gods and our gods, and they're worth mentioning. So their gods, for example, had names. So they had a court to Pan, which is one of their gods, and the nymphs. Pan and the nymphs. Which, if you have a band and you need a name, I mean, I think that's kind of cool. That's free for you today. Like, Pan and the nymphs, like that's one of the things and places and gods that they worshiped. They had a god named Nemesis, so they had the court of Nemesis there in Caesarea Philippi. That means nothing to me. When I think of Nemesis, like, my mind runs back about 12 to, 15 years, like when my kids were little and I was actually in touch with like children's TV shows, which I'm about to get back in touch with because now we have a granddaughter, so this is kind of cool, I hope. But my favorite show, and this is one where I may or may not admit to having watched it even without the kids on occasion, flipping channels like, oh yeah, this is so entertaining, was Phineas and Ferb. Anybody watch Phineas and Ferb? Okay, a few of you. Okay, feeling lonely. All right, listen. This is free to you too. Like, if you're looking for entertainment that your kids are going to like and that you'll actually enjoy, you'll thank me for this later if you can find it somewhere, Phineas and Ferb. But, Dr. Doofenshmirtz was my personal favorite. He had a nemesis, Perry the Platypus. It's all silly. Nemesis, Zeus. Okay, yeah. So their gods had names. Our gods don't have names, but we know what they are. You can name them. Our gods are money. Our gods are sex. Our gods are comfort. Our gods are leisure. We've got a god of status. You keep going, but you get the point. Those are the gods of our city, and they worshiped their gods that had names differently than we worship ours. What did they do? They sacrificed animals, for example, to their gods. What do we sacrifice? I mean, if we're honest, we sacrifice ourselves and others. I think that's a step up. We sacrifice our integrity for the God of money, our conscience for the God of sex. Run down the list. Relationships, family, reputation, physical, spiritual, emotional well-being, and health. Suddenly it seems serious, like this whole idolatry thing. Okay, the other difference that I think is worth mentioning is that we worship our gods all over the city. They worshiped at a particular place. And that particular place is the reason Jesus has had these guys hike for 62 miles in 3 days, in which they're going, why are we doing this, Lord? Let me show you a picture of an artist's rendering of this city. It's based on archaeology, and so this is an informed opinion. If you take a look, you can see the rock wall there at the top of the city. The whole city runs up a hill, and at the bottom of that rock wall, and you can kind of see like the Grotto of Pan, and you can see the outline of a couple of temples. What that is a huge rock platform, a big flat rock platform that you can actually walk on today, and we will in February, and you can see the Grotto of Pan. And then this is an artist rendering of what it looked like when it was actually up and running. So just like from left to right, you see the cave entrance, which is still there, but the Temple of Augustus was in front of that. You have the court of Pan and the nymphs, just couldn't add all the words. You have the Temple of Zeus next to that, and it's not noted, is the court of Nemesis. Then you have the upper tomb temple, okay, of the sacred goats. And then here's the other band name. The lower temple is the tomb temple of Pan and the dancing goats, which might be better than Pan and the nymphs. But the idea is that their worship all took place on the most defining feature of the city that stood above the city and that spoke to the city. All the temples, all what? Built on a rock. Jesus takes his guys 3 days. They're wondering, what the heck are we doing? You got blisters and stuff. You get all the way there. He says, all right, so you've probably been wondering why we're here. I have 2 questions I'm going to ask you. One about other people and one about yourself. We're going to compare. So you guys are my crowd managers among many other things. Like when we're having an event, I'm going to do the Sermon on the Mount. I sent you guys out with all the flyers, you know? You're the ones who set up and take down the chairs. You're the ones who do entrance and exits. You're the ones who manage the crowds around me so they don't literally actually crush me. Like you are in contact with the people. You go out and you buy the food for us. Like you're doing all the commercial transactions for our little organization here. And here's the deal. You talk with these people all the time and they recognize you and then they talk to you and they talk to you about me. So, question number 1. Who are these people who, by the way, are Jewish people who know the pattern of the lives of all the characters of the Old Testament? Who are these people as they're watching my life and seeing the pattern of it playing out? Who are they saying that I am? I mean, are they making the connections? Are they seeing the similarities? And then they start answering his question. Well, some say you're John the Baptist. I mean, he's not an Old Testament character, but he was your cousin and he was recently here. And they see the similarities. They see the patterns and they're like, that's kind of curious. And some say that you're Elijah and they see the pattern. And some say that you're Jeremiah and they see the pattern. And some say that you're one of the other prophets, this prophet or that prophet or this prophet or that prophet, which if you just kind of take a time out and think about it is miraculous actually. How does one man's life gather up and collect the patterns of all of these people who lived hundreds, if not thousands of years before him and complete them all in one life? If he's not God and if God did not ordain that all of their lives pointed singularly to him. So Jesus says, all right, so that's what they're saying. Here's why we're here. Big rock background, lots of temples. Who do you say that I am? Because you're my guys. You know, I'm doing life 24/7, 365 with you. I haven't maybe let you know this yet, but I'm going to leave this whole mission to you. I am pouring myself all the time into you. Are you any different from everyone else? And Peter has one of his finest moments ever. Matthew 16, verse 16 Simon Peter. And incidentally, this is where he receives the name Peter. His name is Simon. That's what his mom called him, you know. Jesus gives him the name Peter in this story. Peter, speaking for the group, steps up and he says, I got this one, guys. Just let me take it. I'm feeling confident. I think I got it. He says, you are the Christ. What does that mean? You're the Messiah. You are, in fact, the one that all of these prophets pointed to, that all of these characters pointed to, that John the Baptist came and that even he pointed to. Very clearly pointed to. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You're the one that we've been waiting for all of this time. You are God-made man, come into the world to rescue his people. That's who you are. And Jesus then lays hold of this great big stone upon which all of these false temples, all of these false gods have been built. And he answered him and he says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon son of Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. Like, this little conversation that we had, you didn't put it, together in your calculator and then hit equals and come up with the right, conclusion on your own. But instead, no. My Father who is in heaven has revealed this to you. And then he says, and it's a hard saying, he says, and I tell you that you are Peter. And then he says, and on this rock. Now, hang on a second. Peter in Greek is the word Petros. It means stone or rock. So he gives him a new name. It means rock. But then he says, on this rock. What's the rock? I think almost without question, the rock is the statement that he just made. The rock is the foundation upon which I, Jesus, he says now, will build what? My church, my dwelling place in the earth. My temple. I'm not going to build it on a rock like what you see in this city with all of these temples and all of that stuff. And it's a very different kind of thing. I'm going to build it out of people. Every different kind of person on the planet is going to be as beautiful as the diversity of the entirety of humanity. And they are all of them going to be filled with my spirit. And they are each one of them going to be a temple of the living God. And collectively, they will be my dwelling place on the earth. And they won't just have faith. They'll go out and dadgum do things. The rock is the statement upon which the church is then built. On this rock, he says, I will build my church. And then he says, now let me tell you how powerful that spirit-filled church, those spirit-filled people are going to be. He's like, oh man, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. What are gates? They're defensive. Gates are meant to keep people out. They're meant to protect you from invading armies. Oh my goodness, here comes the threat. Shut the gates. He's like, yeah, so if you're a believer in Jesus and you are filled with my spirit and you are armed with this particular statement, this idea, and you understand what it means and you have the capacity to articulate it, not even the gates of hell can withstand. Like you can just kick them down, Like I'm a little dude. I just step right on them. And so also should you. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So then what is a Christian? Because that's our big question. And I have 4 statements. The first of which is that a Christian is someone who knows who Jesus really is, as opposed to who or what other people think that he is. Like he says, well, what are people saying about me? And they're like, well, they say this and this and this and this. He's like, okay, what about you? And Peter gets it right, and the whole group gets it right. Like, yes, that's who you are. I'm going to read you a really, maybe even the most famous quote of C.S. Lewis, which means that 99% of you have heard this several times, but I want you to consider it anyway because it's famous for a reason. And ask yourself, if you just believe that Jesus is a great moral teacher, if you just believe that Jesus is a great philosopher, if you just believe that Jesus, I don't know, maybe he was a great theologian, perhaps even a prophet, maybe even the greatest prophet, like if that's all that you believe, listen to the logic of this and see if you can resist it. Lewis says that a man who is merely a man, so he's not God, which is in fact what Jesus claimed. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. Why does that matter? Because I think that's what most folks think. Like, go to Las Olas and just ask, who would you say that Jesus is? Well, I think that Jesus was. It's typically a very favorable view. Lewis is like, why is this favorable? I mean, if he's not who he says he is, he's certainly not great. If he's not who he says he is, he's definitely not moral. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would instead either be insane because he's delusional. He thinks he's one thing, but he's not. So that's one option, or else, and worse, be the devil of hell. He would be the greatest fraud ever foisted in the history of humanity. And then he rightly says, you must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else he's insane, or something worse. But let's not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher, because he hasn't left that open for us, and he didn't intend to. A Christian, first of all, is someone who knows who Jesus really is, as opposed to who or what people generally tend to think or say that he is. But then secondly, a Christian is someone who makes Jesus known to others, and in doing so, robs hell itself of eternal citizens, storms the gates, kicks them down. Listen to what Jesus says, because he continues. He says in verse 19, I will give you the keys. This is another hard saying, by the way, the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And I understand that he's speaking specifically to Peter here. That's the context. But 2 chapters later, he gives the same keys to all the rest of the disciples. And then 10 chapters after that, in commissioning his entire church to go into all the world and to make disciples, he gives the keys to us. Do you have the keys? If you know the gospel, if you can articulate the gospel, and you can, the keys are yours. The keys are mine. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm utilizing the keys that he's graciously given to me. What are these keys? Because they seem obvious. The keys are this teaching that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. God made man come to earth to live a perfect life that we have not, and then to substitute his perfect life on a cross for us to pay the penalty to God that we owe to God for all the ways that we've lived for the gods of our city. Bottom line, through his suffering and death and burial and then resurrection, by which we know that that payment has been accepted, we are free from hell and free for heaven. We're made citizens of a different land. I mean, keys, if you think about it, lock and unlock things. Keys open and close things. Keys permit or deny access to things. And in this in this instance, what we're dealing with is heaven itself. And if you think about it, like if there is anywhere in the entire universe that you do not want to be locked out of, it is heaven, isn't it? I mean, that's eternal, man. And if you love God, and you love people, or at least the people in your life that you know, and you believe this, you've got the keys. I mean, if you showed up for church this morning and you got here super early, which would be very weird, would it not? But if you did, hypothetically, and the door is locked and you don't have a key, you're stuck until someone with a key comes and lets you in. Who do you need to let in? Because you have the keys. It's amazing. However, the disciples do not yet understand all of this. Now, they get that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and they are super excited about that for the wrong reason. Because they think, as did all of the Jews of this particular day in this moment, that the Christ, the Son of the living God, had a mission very different from the mission that Jesus has actually embarked upon. They think he's going to come as a political Messiah, as a military Messiah, that he's going to raise up an army, that he's going to throw off the oppressive yoke of the Romans, that he's going to restore the nation of Israel to the glory days of David and Solomon. They are thinking entirely about this world and about this kingdom and about that kind of freedom and that kind of oppression, and whether they realize it or not yet, they're thinking about, hey, what's our position going to be in this whole deal? Because, I mean, if Jesus is that, then we've got kind of a sweet part of this thing, right? And Jesus knows that. So what does he have to do? He's got to deconstruct their wrong understanding of what it is that he's come to do. He hasn't come to free them from Rome. And he's not just focused on one nation state. He is focused on offering freedom to anyone, anywhere who will have it from something far more oppressive and significant than Rome and significantly long. I mean, we're talking about eternity versus now. From sin, from death, from hell itself. His mission is ultimately to claim the world. So Jesus now has to kind of deconstruct their wrong ideas and then construct a right understanding of what it is that he's come to do. It says in verse 20 that as soon as they've had now this conversation, Jesus strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ, which I'm sure was confusing to them because they're thinking, hey, we need to get the news out. We've got to get the army going. We need some fundraising, like we probably need to start training people. And he really is appealing as a military Messiah. I mean, he multiplies food miraculously, like he raises the dead. I don't know, that might be helpful. They're excited, and he's like, calm down, guys. I don't think you get it yet. And then it says, from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, not to raise up an army and fight off the Romans and all of that other stuff, but instead that he must go to Jerusalem and what? Suffer many things from the leadership of Israel, from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed. And on the third day be raised again from the dead. And Peter, who's listening to this, because they got 62 miles to walk back. This is a 3-day conversation, and then he just kept having the conversation. Read through the Gospels and look for how many times he explains this to these guys. And they don't get it until after the resurrection. But they're going, that doesn't sound like a good idea, I had already sort of picked out a nation that was going to be mine under your rulership. Peter pulls Jesus aside. He's like, you need to stop this. It says he began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you. That's not the mission of the Christ in my mind. And Jesus turned, and then he gave Peter a different name. He says, get behind me, Satan. How many of y'all named your kid Satan? Anybody? If you did, would he ever get a job? Does that make sense? Satan? You see the teacher the first day of school. Why are you drawing a pentagram on your desk? Come on. Talk about disadvantaging a child. He takes the name that is below every name, and he says, yeah, my preeminent apostle, it's not who you are yet, but it's what you're going to be, which is what Jesus sees in you too, by the way. What you can be if faith shows up in action. He's like, I'm going Satan on you now. Get behind me, Satan, you are a hindrance to me. Why? For you are not setting your mind on the things of God. No, you've got your eye on, Syria or something, and you've already figured out where you're going to live, and your mind is on the things of man. In other words, Peter, look, when you say that I'm the Christ, the Son of the living God, you speak for God. God revealed that to you. And in that revelation, you give to the whole of humanity the foundational statement upon which my church will be built. That is the key that opens the door to heaven and tramples the gates of hell. But when you try to prevent me from suffering and dying and being buried and then ultimately being risen from the dead, in order to effect that, well, then you're speaking for Satan. And you're working against me. And you're locking people up in hell. So what is a Christian? He's someone who knows who Jesus is, someone who makes Jesus known to others, but then thirdly and quickly, a Christian is also someone who trusts in what Jesus has done, who sees the invitation and goes, oh my goodness, why would I not do that? That's amazing. So let me see if I get this right. He has come to wipe the slate clean for me. I don't have to try to work it off because I'm never going to be able to do that. There's no security in that. It's an impossibility. He has come, he's lived the perfect life. He has suffered and died to pay the debt, past, present, and even future for me, and to clothe me in his righteousness. And when God looks at me, he declares me just, even though I don't deserve that, anything but. He gives me his Spirit. He makes me brand new, like repurposes and remissions my life. Why would I not do that? I need to abandon trust in anything that I do, and I need to wholly and fully and completely trust in his perfect and already accepted work on my behalf. That sounds like freedom to me. That sounds amazing. So a Christian is someone who knows who Jesus is as opposed to maybe what others think. Someone who makes Jesus known to others because you can't not. Someone who trusts in what Jesus has done. And then finally and fourthly, a Christian is someone who lives his or her life for Jesus as opposed to the gods of Caesarea Philippi, which, you're not really going to do, right? Nobody's going to go offer a goat to the, Pan and the dancing goats or something later today. Like, it's not on the agenda. You don't have time for that. We've got other things to do. But as opposed to the gods of this city too. We don't worship these either. After Jesus tells Peter and these guys what his, meaning Jesus' mission entails, he then tells these guys and me and you what our mission entails. And the similarity is pretty striking and a little intimidating until you really understand it. It says in verse 24, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. Very popular passage of Scripture. I've taught on this probably 100 times, and every time I've said what I'm going to say now, which is that word deny in the Greek language, because we're dealing with an English translation, makes it clear that what Jesus is referring to here is a moment in which we go, okay, I'm going to stop flirting with you, Lord. I'm going to stop dancing with you. I'm going to stop withholding me from you. I'm going to stop with the 1 foot, 1 in out. And I'm going to surrender imperfectly, but I'm giving myself to you. I'm going to deny me, and what do I receive in response? Him. So if anyone would come after me, if anybody wants to be one of my followers, if you want to follow after me, okay, well then let him deny himself, let her deny herself, and then take up his cross, which is the language of death, to which Luke in his version of this adds the word daily. It's a daily thing. Take up his cross daily, and then follow me. And then he says, for whoever would save his life, meaning whoever chooses to live for himself, or whoever chooses to live for herself, whoever decides, I'm just going to I got my own agenda. I have my own mission. I have my own things that I'm going to pursue. I have my own things that I'm going to worship. And the reality is, I'm going to live for me. I'm going to save that life by not denying myself and not crucifying it so that I can follow Jesus. Okay, he says, well, whoever would save his life will, in the end when he dies and enters into eternity, what? Will lose it. But whoever loses his life, whoever says, all right, you know what? I'm believing that God has a greater life for me, and even a more pleasurable and a more satisfying and certainly a more purposeful and meaningful life than me. I can actually do things that are going to be significant, like for forever. Like I can get to the end of my life and go, yeah, something I did mattered, and something I said mattered, and maybe even several things. That's pretty amazing. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Whoever wakes up every day and reaffirms that one-time decision to go all in by crucifying whatever you need to crucify to follow Jesus in that day, day after day after day, imperfectly, but there's grace for that, is going to lose it. What is Jesus doing? He's dividing humanity into two camps, those who live for themselves and those who live for him. And is there another option? Those who live for himself and those who live for him. And he's telling all of us in advance, hey, here's how it ends. If you live for yourself, then when you die, what will you lose? Everything you've lived for, because you lose yourself. But if you live for me, okay, then when you die, what do you lose? Nothing. What do you gain? And for all of eternity, which is a key word, you gain everything you've lived for. I love Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian. He was martyred by the Nazis 21 days before Hitler died. Think about that. Like 3 weeks before pretty much the end of World War II in the European theater, at least. and he's martyred. And you look at that and you go, oh man. And it is a loss, there's no doubt, but I wonder if this man would be nearly as well known if in fact he hadn't been martyred. And what is God's eye on? The gates of hell and the doors of heaven. He's thinking eternally. But Bonhoeffer was a genius. Listen to what he says. He says, the cross is laid on every Christian. Well, he's right. Jesus just said it. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his what? Cross, and follow me. So he's like, all right, so let's deal with that. The cross is laid on every Christian. In fact, he says the first Christ suffering, which every man must experience, is the call to abandon the attachments of this world, which are not Pan and the Nymphs or Pan and the Dancing Goats. It's all the stuff that we worship. It's wealth, it's comfort, it's status, it's all of this. And he's not saying you can't have those things. He's saying you can't live for them. They can't be your God. And when you have to choose between them and Jesus, you've pre-decided what you're going to do in that decision, right? You've made the decision that you're going to crucify whatever you need to crucify in order to follow Christ and find something that will actually satisfy you, that will actually fill your soul. He says the first Christ suffering, which every man must experience, is the call to abandon the attachments of this world. It is that dying of the old man, which is the result of what? Of his encounter with Christ. What is he saying? He's saying, yeah, you got to hold everything with a loose hand, but what do you get? You get Christ. Jesus doesn't come to me and say, all right, so here's what I want you to do, Tom. I want you to let go of everything and then gain nothing. So now you just have empty hands. He's saying, no, I want you to let go of everything. And then I want you to lay hold of me. And I want you to know that I'm going to give you what the God of wealth and sex and leisure and comfort and whatever is not designed to give and will not and cannot give. It's not loss, in other words. It's infinite gain. It is that dying of the old man, which is the result of his encounter with Christ. When you realize what you're getting, you're like, how fast can I give this away? You know, it's the laborer in somebody else's field who comes across the treasure hidden in the field. And if you know the story in the Bible, he buries it. And then what does he do? He sells everything that he has, and then he buys the field so he can have the treasure. That's it. It's the pearl merchant who's built an empire. And yet, when he encounters this one magnificent pearl that he spent his whole life looking for, he sells his entire empire so he can have the one pearl. That's it. Do those guys do it sadly? No. As Jesus tells the story, he says the man joyfully sold everything that he had to gain the field. We feel like Christ is coming to us and saying, gimme, gimme, gimme. And he's saying, no. Open your hands and open your heart and open your life and receive, receive, receive. Let go so you can lay hold. Anyway, Bonhoeffer continues. He says, as we embark upon discipleship, this following of Jesus, we surrender ourselves to Christ in union with his death. We give over our lives to death, meaning death to the things that we would have otherwise lived for. And thus it begins. I love this. He says the cross is not the terrible end to an otherwise God-fearing and happy life. It's like, oh, great, now I'm a Christian, this is going to be miserable. It's like, no. That's not it at all. But it meets us at the beginning of our communion with Christ, which is beautiful and rich and amazing and life-giving. And then here is arguably his most famous statement. He says, when Christ calls a man, when Christ calls a woman, he bids him, he bids her, come and die. But only so that he or she can truly live. Find all that other stuff that doesn't work and only brings you death. Step into the light. Hey, the door's open. Will you come in or not? So I want to close today by just running back through these statements and giving you the opportunity, and I want us all to do this, just to ask ourselves as we look at each one of these statements individually quickly, so what is one thing I can do because faith calls me to do in regard to this? Like, What am I supposed to believe? What am I supposed to do? Like, what can I do? Like, what can I believe? What can I do? Like, what's a step that I can take? So what is a Christian? That's the question. And again, a Christian, first of all, is someone who knows who Jesus is. Do you know who he is? Do you believe that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God? It's a start. It's the foundational point. It's to realize that this man is appreciably different. He's not a prophet. He's not merely a teacher. He is the Son of God made man come to earth to find you, to claim you for himself. Someone who knows who Jesus is. Secondly, a Christian is someone who makes Jesus known to others who are what? They're locked out of heaven until you or I show up with the key. So you just start running through your house, through your workplace, through your school, through your network of friends. You ask yourself, who's locked out? Because I have the key. You start leveraging opportunities and things like there's a platform of opportunities here that you can begin to use to lead and to guide them in a conversation about who Jesus really is, about what he really offers, about what he's really asking, about what he's really giving, about what he's really calling them to do, and all of these things. Messages that you can send, videos that you can send. Alpha is starting up September 7. You should begin to think about your alpha list now. Start writing down names. Who's locked out? Who just needs me to open the door? Start praying for those people. Or maybe you just need to sit down with them and realize that, okay, it's a little intimidating, but they realize that you love them, that you love this God, that something's happened with you, and that you believe this stuff is real. And you begin a conversation. It doesn't have to close in one conversation, but you begin to pursue people and actively make Christ known to them and available to them. The door is open. Invite them to walk through. But you do need to walk up with the key, because right now they're trying to get in, or they don't even know it's locked. Thirdly, a Christian is someone who trusts in what Jesus has done. That is to say, who accepts the full payment of the debt that they owe to God, that he came into the world to pay in their place. Who says, this sounds like a good deal. Why wouldn't I do this? And maybe that's your step today. It's like, yeah, I need to receive what the Lord is inviting me into here. And then lastly, a Christian is someone who lives his or her life for Jesus, which is what it, by the way, means to truly live. And so maybe the question for you, the action point is, all right, so what worldly attachment do you need to kind of go? All right, I'm gonna hold it with an open hand. It's that little bit of me that I've always said, okay, Lord, you can't have any of this because you're afraid he might ask you for some, and he probably will. Because you are sweeter to me. It is my joy to say this is, whatever this is you. And I'm looking for life, not in this, but I'm looking for life in you. So we're going to come to the table here in just a minute. But then after that, I want to remind you that we have people who would love to pray with you about any or all of this stuff or anything else. You have a decision you need to make. You've got a relationship that's in crisis. You've got a physical problem or mental or emotional problem that we might pray for healing. Or maybe you need that power of the Spirit. You're listening to this and you've got an addiction. You're like, that's the thing, or you're addicted to something else. And you're like, that's the thing. Come and let us pray for you. Let us ask God to give you the power to treasure him more than whatever that thing happens to be and to let that thing go. So I want to encourage you to do that, okay? Christian is someone who knows who Jesus is, who makes Jesus known to others, who trusts in what Jesus has done, who lives his or her life for Jesus. What's a thing that he would call you to do, because that's what your faith calls you to do? All right, let's pray.